Hello everyone, my name is Annika Srinivasan. Today I will be discussing my risk project, which is on the development of a wound dressing robot. So to begin with, the motivation behind this project is that chronic wounds are a pressing health concern, particularly among the older population. And along with that, the global population age is increasing. Therefore, the prevalence of chronic wounds and the need for wound assessment and care is rising. Coupled with the growing shortage of nurses in the United States, we believe there is potential to support nurses by introducing robots which can automate wound treatment tasks. And so a previous study was done in this area, where the wound care process was observed in both a hospital and an assisted living facility to determine if there is an opportunity for automation and which specific tasks may benefit from it. And so the study found that setup and dressing were the top time-consuming steps, constituting 44% and 12% respectively of the total time spent for the entire wound care process, which you can see here in this pie chart on the right. Within each of these wound care steps, setup included 22 distinct tasks and dressing care involved 15, indicating that the dressing care step had less diversity in tasks. Additionally, as displayed in this stacked bar chart, 71% of the task observations under the dressing care step was the dressing task. The dressing task is defined as just covering a wound and securing it to the skin. And examples of other tasks that may have been seen during this dressing care step include like moving the patient and manipulating clothing. But considering how demanding dressing care is in regards to time and also its lower task diversity, we selected it as the step to automate. So considering this, our goal is to support nurses in dressing wounds to allow them to complete other tasks, such as direct patient care, patient interaction, and resting. And all of these tasks have been directly correlated to both better patient outcome and nurse job satisfaction. And our contribution is that we identified motion and design requirements for robotic wound dressing and applied that gathered information to develop potential end effectors for dressing. So what does our approach look like? Well, the first step is classification. So that is compiling all observations of wound dressing from that previous study and then classifying them based on the motion type observed. Specifically, we examined observations involving pressure ulcers, considering their prevalence among chronic wound types. Now, following this, we identified specific characteristics of each motion type related to robot features and capabilities that we should be considering. After is design, where we leverage this data analysis to inform the design of a wound dressing end effector. And then next is prototyping, so fabricating a low fidelity prototype and then testing it, just to determine its functionality. And finally, we have evaluation. So assessing the performance of our design. And we hope to possibly do our participatory study in the future with nurses so they can directly provide us some feedback. All right, so as I mentioned, the first step is classification. So I took all of the observations related to wound dressing and identified the motion types involved. So for example, one common motion type observed was moving in and out of the plane. So this could correspond to placing an adhesive pad over a wound on a person's ankle. Another motion type that was seen was moving along the plane. So let's say now that we have placed an adhesive pad over someone's wound, we then need to secure it by pressing along the border of the pad, for example. And then one other motion type included moving around the plane, so wrapping around a patient's ankle, for instance. So the next step was identification. So taking these three common motion types observed that I just talked about and then breaking them down further by establishing certain characteristics related to robot features and capabilities. And so these characteristics include the number and type of contact regions used to manipulate the dressing, the grasp type, the materials nurses interacted with, and common tasks observed and their frequency. Now, examples of common contact regions include 4 fingertips and a thumb, as well as bimanual manipulation, which just means using 2 hands. And then frequent grasp types that we saw were a prismatic pinch, pressing, and a circular sphere/disc power grasp. And then finally, the materials that nurses typically interacted with included adhesive dressings, tape, wraps, and non-adhesive dressings like gauze, for example. And so looking at this motion type chart, considering the overlap between the contact regions used for moving in and out of the plane and the contact regions used for moving along the plane, we concentrated on developing a wound dressing end effector that can perform these three motion types. So specifically, the tasks we want our robot to achieve are picking up, placing, and pressing dressing. And so this leads us to the design stage. Once we determined which tasks our robot would perform, we researched different methods for picking up and placing materials. So in particular, we reference robots manipulating textiles because of their similarity to certain types of dressings, like gauze, which is 100% cotton. And then finding these existing approaches to material manipulation, we identify how such designs could translate or be adapted to secure dressing as well, to get that pressing motion we talked about. And then we found the mechanism shown here involving a roller wrapped in card clothing that can rotate in one direction to grab a cotton sheet and move in the opposite direction to release it was a good design. So this mechanism is optimal compared to other end effector designs like grippers and artificial hands because we can apply it for pressing too. So just by rotating the roller and moving it along a surface. Additionally, to ensure the roller is in the correct workspace, such as the wound region, for example, we would need to connect this structure holding the roller to a robot manipulator that can move it to the location of interest. All right, so to pick up and place the dressing, there are two motion approaches that we explored. So the first is shown in this diagram here, where we use this stabilizer to hold down the dressing on one side and then the roller on the opposite side. And the roller rotates to basically scrunch up the dressing and allow it to be pinched and placed on another surface. And so to demonstrate this idea, we actually fabricated a rapid prototype. So in this video, the blue triangular prism on the left represents the stabilizer, while the red cylinder on the right is the roller. And as you can see in the images on the left-hand side as well, just to continue talking about this rapid prototype, we integrated some texture on the roller. And the reason this is necessary is to ensure that there is sufficient friction to allow for the movement of the dressing. And so this design criteria is also applicable to the second motion approach that we considered, which I will show on the next slide. So this motion approach involved dressing latching onto the roller. And so this is how the roller mechanism we referenced earlier actually picked up that cotton sheet. However, the authors noted that their mechanism, because they use this card clothing, it pierces the cotton material to pick it up. And this could potentially be an issue for us if we wanted to implement this motion approach, because when manipulating dressing, it could possibly damage it, considering how fragile certain dressings can be, like gauze, for example. So another aspect we had to consider for our design is that this roller mechanism needs to be able to adjust to the curvature and contours of the human body and achieve this motion that you see here in these three images. This is particularly significant when pressing along a dressing to secure it to a patient's skin, for example. And so one solution to introduce this compliance is incorporating living hinges into the roller mechanism, and this would allow for the rotation about the indicated z-axis. Living hinges are just joints created by locally reducing the width of material. And here on this slide, we have an example. So this is an example of living hinges integrated into a basic parallelogram linkage to introduce compliance. And specifically, it's the parts drawn in gray where you can see the width has been reduced. And then this is how we implemented the living hinges into our design. So there are living hinge structures on the top and bottom of the roller mechanism separated by these red spacers, and the bottom living hinges connect to the roller. Note that the final design of the wound dressing end effector, the living hinges are not directly connected to the roller because we want to prevent them from rotating along with the roller. Instead, there is an intermediate connector between the two parts, which I'll explain in the upcoming slides. But just note that this figure is meant to concentrate on compliance integration. And then as I mentioned earlier, this entire roller mechanism will connect to a robot manipulator. And so we actually fabricated 2 low-fidelity prototypes as shown here, just to assess how compliant our design was and determine how changing the dimensions of our mechanism, such as the dimensions of the living hinge, could affect this compliance. So we have an idea of what dimensions we should be using for our final design so that we can sufficiently have this compliance to adjust to the human body's curvature. All right, so here's a diagram of my final design. So specifically, this shows a cross-section view of the roller mechanism, and it includes an actuator. And how we are actuating this roller is via an outrunner motor, which how they work is essentially the outside rotates rather than a shaft, like with a direct current or DC motor. So let's break down this design. So as you can see here, there are living hinge structures located at the top and bottom of the mechanism, which we talked about earlier, separated by these living hinge red spacers. Starting from the left side, the bottom living hinge connects to an orange intermediate piece that we talked about earlier called the motor mount. And then the motor mount attaches to the outrunner motor, which again is what is actuating our roller, and it's illustrated in pink. Note that part of the outrunner motor is held stationary, as indicated by the purple shaded region. So in short, living hinge connects to motor mount, which is secured to the stationary part of the outrunner motor. Now the rotating part of the outrunner motor, which is represented by the yellow shaded region, attaches to the blue roller piece. And so this assembly, comprised of the living hinge, motor mount, outrunner motor, and roller piece, is then mirrored on the right side of the mechanism as well, just to distribute the weight evenly. And so we chose to make the length of this complete cylinder equivalent to the width of 4 fingertips, because if you recall, 4 fingertips and a thumb was the most frequent contact region for both picking up and placing dressing, as well as pressing dressing to secure it. And so the 2 roller pieces can't directly connect because of this extra length that we need to satisfy this design choice. And so therefore, we include this green roller spacer. And so similar to the roller pieces, the roller spacer was initially hollow. However, the outrunner motors kind of fill this empty section of these blue roller pieces. And so therefore, to ensure the weight is spread out evenly, we also filled the middle of the roller spacer as well. But rather than just filling the entirety of the roller spacer, because we want to avoid it just being unnecessarily heavy, we decided to use this concept of a triangular infill. Basically, these repeated hollow triangular structures. And then finally, as we discussed earlier, top living hinge will connect to a robot manipulator. And this is what the corresponding CAD looks like. Shown on the left is an isometric view, and on the right, we have a section analysis. All right, so let's discuss my future work. One of the following steps includes establishing which motion approach, one of the 2 that we discussed earlier, is optimal. Because this is going to indicate whether or not we need a stabilizer, and how will we design this? How are we going to incorporate this into the mechanism? These are questions we need to answer if we want to do the first motion approach. We also need to determine how to connect the roller mechanism to a robot manipulator. After this, we plan to design additional roller mechanisms that utilize other forms of actuation, such as a direct current or DC motor or a linear actuator. Then we will fabricate all 3 models. And then we will evaluate their ability to pick up, place, and press dressing through a series of experiments that involve various dressing sizes. And we plan to compute the average success rate based on these experiments for each model, and then we can use this data to identify the optimal design for our wound dressing robot. And then lastly, as I mentioned in the beginning, we plan to conduct a participatory study with nurses, allowing them to interact directly with our prototypes and provide feedback, which we will reference to improve our model. Okay, so finally, I want to acknowledge a few people. Thank you to those who helped organize the RISC program, specifically Rachel Burson and Dr. John Dolan. I want to also express my gratitude to my amazing mentor, Zuleika, and my wonderful advisors, Dr. Admoni, Dr. Erickson, and Dr. Dierkes, for the opportunity to work on this project and just for all of your help. And lastly, I want to thank all of the HARP Lab members, Archive Lab members, and just the entire risk cohort for not only helping me during this project whenever I needed it, but also just for being so inviting and welcoming and just creating some of the best memories this summer. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed.